So when I first started um, doing videos, I thought I could help people to know what to do for self-sufficiency. This was more about helping people with self-sufficiency. I wasn't really trying to push other things. I had felt the need that there's a need for people to get help with self-sufficiency in this country and in other places too. The idea is that the self-sufficiency is being robbed in the Western world, not just America, but all over the place. When you don't have self sufficiency, your life can become a living hell. And so, the push for gardening videos. Gardening can immensely help your financial budget, can help other areas of your life, can help your nutrition levels and your health, especially because the things you're getting in the stores are extremely processed. They're also sometimes made by people that despise their consumers. I mean, what kind of product are you going to get if the person making it hates you? They're taught to hate the poor and the middle class. I didn't originally intend that I would be doing economics videos and other videos that explain other things about how to fix the country, but people do need ideas about how to fix the country right now because it's kind of bad. Not just this country, but Europe. So this led into I thought I could do a few economics videos. The idea about economics is you're trying to teach what kind of financial policies are going to best help the country. Okay? That's extremely important. I don't consider myself an economics person, but I understand finance, and I had worked in finance and some other areas in the past. Um, Jobs where you had to kind of have your head on straight. And this leads into economics. So when I was in college, one of the things they did not teach, okay, that had been removed from economics teaching was Keynesian economics. Keynes economics, okay? Keynes economics is extremely important because it embraces a few concepts about how to fix and help the country when it's troubled. John Maynard Keynes was a British economics person that developed Keynesian economics. Okay, you have not heard of Keynesian economics. Almost hardly anyone has. But it used to be the main financial policy from the 30s on up until the 1970s. And it was used uh, very dominantly in both the US and other Western European countries. Even the British um, used it, as well as, in some ways, the British used it a little bit more than the Americans in some ways. And it's also very telling that Britain produced this great person, John Maynard Keynes. And for a while, a lot of Europe was using these ideas of John Maynard Keynes. Part of why his ideas were so good is they incorporated the idea that the government should act like a white knight to help the people when the economy isn't going right. And this is why they were so important and why Keynesian economics needs to be talked about. Now, in modern times, even since who knows how long, but for decades, Keynesian economics has been removed from the schools and the teaching of how to think and act for people in government and for people that are being trained to later go into various government positions. Okay, that is um, when you consider that Keynesian economics incorporates white knight policies of how to fix things, and that is being left out. This is why so many things are going wrong in the US, in Canada, in Britain, in pretty much most of the developed world. So you'll hear people jokingly say Bidenomics, like Joe Biden's economic policies. You'll also hear Abenomics, okay? The Japanese leader that was, let's say, lost, okay? He was pushing Abenomics. These are all lies, okay? When they take somebody's name who doesn't even know crap, who doesn't know or care about the country and isn't fixing anything, and then attach their name to economics, it is replacing and hiding and camouflaging that there used to be a better policy in place, and that many of these developed countries, the ones that had really good leadership in governments in the past, when they were good, when times were good, it was because they were practicing a form that was better. Okay? Now, to give you an idea, um, after Keynesian economics was mostly removed, um, to explain this, it's kind of there a little bit, but where it is mentioned, it's watered down, and the idea of the government acting like a white knight is definitely not taught. Instead, you only hear stuff like macroeconomics, microeconomics. That's what I heard in college. That's what you hear in the other schools. And then you only hear supply and demand theory, okay, where supply and demand are all you really need to know, and that supply and demand correct themselves. Okay, that's baloney. Supply and demand can be influenced, and they should, for good, influence towards the most positive outcome. You hear classical economic theories such as proposed by Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mill. They just believed that the market would correct itself and that you have no responsibility to try and make it better or fix things. Okay? That is complete stupidness. And they also taught a laissez-faire approach. Okay, that government should be limited. That part's a little tricky because government should be limited, but it is also true that when things are breaking down, somebody needs to have responsibility to make it better. Okay, they also taught Say's law. Um, Say's law is basically just a classical economic idea of supply creates its own demand. It means that production inherently generates enough demand to purchase goods and services. Suggests that recessions are temporary and self-correcting. That is not true. Okay? Say's law only holds when times are good. And let me explain this a little better. And this is why classical economic theory, classical economic approaches, such as from those three gentlemen, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mill, don't really work because you can reach a point in the economy where the damage accruing per year in a tailspin year, if things are bad enough, the damage accruing per year can be greater than the government's ability to fix if it was using all of its resources. That is the reality we're in right now. Okay, do you understand how serious that is? Um, when times are good, things will self-correct to a point. Okay, but the idea that the market will correct itself doesn't work because also what are we seeing in our modern era? We're seeing that the middle class is being eaten by the elite class. Okay? That is the reality for both Europe, Canada, and the US, and many developed nations. And the markets, teaching people that the markets, recessions, and problems are temporary and self-correcting doesn't address that flaw. It also doesn't address when government needs to help correct and fix things when the damage is accruing past fast enough that it can't correct on its own. Okay, that is pretty serious. So that those were ideas on classical economic theory, the idea of self-regulating markets, Say's law, laissez-faire approach. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back and now go over the Keynesian economics model of John Maynard Keynes. Some of these are really good ideas. They should be taught in the schools. Okay, and also it should be they should make people who are elected officials take economics and finances classes also before they go into office, so that they can actually figure out how to do some good instead of only helping themselves. A lot of people that go into office, they want to just they want to help themselves, and they want to fill their pockets with gold. That's all they care about. Okay, Keynesian economics, first principle, aggregate aggregate demand. Keynes emphasized that aggregate demand, the total demand for goods and services within an economy, is the primary driver of economic activity and employment. Fluctuations in aggregate demand can lead to economic cycles of boom and bust. Um, this principle is slightly different than the other one. It's not exactly the same thing. The other one kind of taught that there were that there was demand, and that it was the primary factor of the economy. But it failed to kind of address that the bust cycles can last longer than necessary, and that they might need a little help getting out. And the Keynesian model emphasizes that the government should try and stabilize things and help smoothen things out a little bit. When usually, the modern model wants to teach you that, which is, let me back up a bit. When I say the modern model, I mean the model that most of societies are using today, where they're not using Keynesian economics, is kind of teaching the idea that if there's a destructive cycle, it's needed. Okay, well, that's a bunch of baloney, because who gets hurt by that? Families do. Okay, families and normal people. The elites don't get busted and hurt by them, not usually. Only when they ignore too many people going on. Okay, second principle in Keynesian economics. Keynesians advocate for active government intervention in the economy, especially during downturns. When private sector demand is weak, the government should step in to increase demand through fiscal policy, such as increased public spending and tax cuts. This is the white knight approach. Okay, that government should help people, that they should try and do some good. Okay, if you think about it, a certain guy who just got elected in the U.S., he is a white knight. His perspective is a white knight. He obviously knows this. Now, when you think about this, okay, the idea that the government should step in and help with public policy, spending, and tax cuts, that can be done in a libertarian sort of way. It doesn't have to be a socialist perspective. Okay, socialism doesn't really help anything. It just enslaves people, and it's communism in progress. Um, Also, you don't have to have big government to teach that the government could bring in um, support and help to the people. It could be done in, in a small government sort of way, because you can have small numbers in government, but still influence, the monetary policy and spending policies and so on. And anyway, this idea that government should be a force for good is extremely important. The white knight perspective is important. People don't, when people just read about Keynesian economics, they're not pointed out that these are white knight perspectives. Okay. Another serious problem with government in general and society in general is you never hear them portray things as if this is good or evil anymore. You should, right? That's partly because people are afraid of backlash on bad decisions or being labeled as corrupt. Okay, but people should think about things in terms of good and evil. Not nobody. They. It's almost like they go through the most extreme effort to not portray things as good and evil anymore. There's a reason people did that. It was not to create bias, but it was to do what's best for society and families. Okay, moving on to bullet point number 3 of Keynesian Economics. Bullet point number 3 is fiscal policy. Keynesian Economics supported the use of fiscal policy to influence economic activity. And I should say, for the good of society and families. That part's not in there, but it's implied. During a recession, a deep recession, or economic damage, increasing government spending and cutting taxes can help boost the um, economic flow, the money flow, and society to pull out of a damaged tailspin. Okay, that's the whole point. Is that you don't want recessions to last too long, and there's things you can do to influence them positive. Conversely, during periods of inflation, the government may reduce spending or increase taxes to cool the economy. So, in other words, what's this saying? It's saying government can help to correct market failures, relieve overburdens, and oppression. Okay, that was the whole point of what government should be doing. Okay, that's the white knight approach. It's really cool. Now, is Keynes economics perfect? No, no kind of policy is. But this kind of policy, the government is helping people instead of the wealthy elite. Why is that a big deal? The wealthy elite wants something for it. Okay? When they help someone, they want your house or your land, or they want some kind of dominance. They have strings attached. This is why government policy should be to help stimulate and strengthen the economy without strings attached. Okay? A few years ago, um, and even recently, people sometimes they would get loans from the government, to save farms in the Midwest or save other businesses. It's not supposed to be a loan. It's supposed to be a grant. You're supposed to correct the market failures, overburdens, and oppression. You're supposed to stop the middle class from being eaten by the elites. That's what they should be doing. There shouldn't be strings attached to that, and that's why. Because people into you need to get people into a position where they can escape overburdens and oppression. And that's how you create a strong economy. To create a strong economy, you have to correct the middle class from being eaten. And this means you need policies that will stimulate small business also. You can't have an economy that is entirely a government economy where everyone's doing government jobs only. It doesn't work. And when small business and the middle class get too small, it becomes too hard to even fix the economy. And that's kind of the position we're in. It's the position that Europe's in. It's the position that the developed world is in. And it's worse for these places that have extremely high tax rates, where the tax rate is the direct tax amount plus the indirect tax amount. That's why they have so many protests and riots in Europe. Okay, when the Paris protests, we'll call them protests, right? It's kind of a joke. When the Paris protests started around 2016, that started because they were already being taxed to death, and a certain leader decided he was going to increase the tax even more, and he was going to mess with their pensions, and that got them flooding the street in protest. Okay, but their indirect tax rate could be, depending on their income bracket, over 60% when factored for indirect and direct taxation together. And a lot of that money gets wasted because people who work in government positions want to be taken care of. They don't want to actually do good. They want the paycheck. They want a larger paycheck than the other people. And they don't really care if their policies and their work has an effect. If they don't care if it's actually doing anything. This is why countries that have really high tax rates, you don't see the burden of the poor and the people getting any better. Okay, back to Keynesian economics. The next principle was multiplier effect. Keynes introduced the concept of the multiplier effect, which suggests that an initial increase in spending, such as government investment, can lead to a larger overall increase in economic activity. Okay, why is he teaching that? He's teaching that to increase economic production and flow, to pull something out of a recession, pull something out of a damage period. That's what people need to understand how to do now. This occurs when the recipients of the initial spending will spend their income, leading to further income and spending in the economy. That's kind of trying to show how a white knight effect would work. But the fact is, this is just a side note, an economy where everyone spends everything they own, everything they bring in all the time, isn't really a stable economy, because you need, in a long-term stable solution, you need people to have an emergency reserve, a backup plan, and the economy has to be based on that people can put something away and not have everything, always paycheck to paycheck. Doesn't work. It makes people desperate. When people are desperate, they don't make good decisions. Okay, next bullet point, investment and interest rates. Keynes argued that investment is influenced by expectations of future profitability and risk, as well as the cost of borrowing and interest rates. Lower interest rates can encourage more investment, stimulating economic growth. Okay, side note here, my other video talks about how lowering and raising interest rates doesn't always work on putting the brakes on the economy or increasing it. And it has to do with whether or not you have a stake in the economy and whether or not you have money. Okay, if the middle class is eaten up, raising or lowering the interest rate only helps the elites. Next bullet point, liquidity preference. Keynes introduced the idea of liquidity preference, which refers to the demand for money versus interest-bearing assets. He argued that people prefer to hold liquid cash money when they are uncertain about the future, affecting overall investment and spending levels. Basically, that means that not all liquidity is the same. Some things you can move and cash out faster than others. Some things you can't move very quickly. and that not all liquidity is the same. There's a different kind of perspective to this, but I'll probably do another video on this, on a better way to think about it. Next bullet point, business cycles. Keynesian economics explains business cycles as the result of fluctuations in demand rather than changes in supply. Economic downturns are often caused by a decline in demand, leading them to reduced production and higher unemployment. That's why you want to correct a damage cycle. High employment, reduced production. Um, there can be area-specific damage where damage can reach a critical point also. That's not in there, but it's trying to help you understand this. Positive and negative economic cycles, basically, and you need to watch for them. Next bullet point, sticky prices and wages. Keynesians believe that taught that prices and wages do not adjust quickly to changes in supply and demand. This can create harm in the economy. It can influence whether recession's coming on or not. It can prevent the market from reaching equilibrium. In all things considered, you want the economy stable, basically. And these things can work against it if wages and prices can't meet where things are going with supply and demand. And basically, markets can become cancerous. Okay? Right now, this is a side note again, we're in a position where much of the Western world, the housing cost has vastly outpriced and increased many times faster than people's wages. This is why that people are so upset and people aren't able to really cope with changes right now. There's a lot of trouble in this. And in actuality, people have pointed out that that was social engineered. People figured out that they could purposely keep some of the housing market out of circulation from the rest of society to fix prices. Okay? If let's say you have 1,000 people that need housing, there's 1,400 housing units available, and you hide 600 of them, and you just keep doing that forever. People were and are doing that. That's just an example. It isn't the exact numbers, but there's actually a lot of housing available, or there was, before they started bringing in all these people from across, other countries. That creates fixed housing prices, that it's an art. It's fixing demand artificially to make people cave in to the price you want, and it's wrong. That's something government should prevent. Okay, that's the white knight approach. Why it's important. See, it's not being taught, and other checks and balances have been removed also. Next bullet point: social welfare and stabilization. Keynesian economics often incorporates social welfare into its policy prescription, arguing that government intervention can both stabilize the economy and help mitigate the impact of damage and recession on individuals and families. Extremely important. More weight night principles, see? Occasionally, this is just a side note, that occasionally, once in a while, people in the United Kingdom would have someone come along that would have policies that they believe that the ruling class should help relieve the burden of the common people and help them. Keynes is one of those. King James, that influenced the creation of the King James Bible, had several written documents also that he believed that the ruling class should help the people and not be a burden to them. It's interesting that occasionally you'll find those people in that country, but they aren't on every street corner. There's not a lot of them. I wish there were more. And All right, moving on. The next bullet point, long-term focus on growth. Keynes' teaching and doctrine focused on short-term stable. I messed that up. While Keynes focused on short-term stabilization, his ideas paved the way for understanding the idea that a sustained long-term growth and long-term position on financial policy and investment and other areas of the economy was important. Basically, long-term is more important than short-term. Okay. In the modern society, short-term is often being pitted against long-term. Okay. This means like picking a cancerous decision that has a short-term gain but a long-term con. That's what a lot of countries are doing right now. And sometimes they do it over, it's completely stupid. Anyway, um, this is basically what I have, all I've got for you for this video. But the idea is once you go over this and think about it, think about how it affects the middle class, the poor class, and the elite class. You think about how what he was teaching. He was basically teaching that governments should help people, and they shouldn't be predators, basically. Okay, this is why this needs to be brought back into schools. They are, they might barely hear mention of Keynes having been in an economic policy or having had a policy. They're not being taught this white knight perspective, which is um, can you imagine how different things would be if people actually were using that information for good instead of, you know, pillaging kind of perspective. Now, just take a side note real quick right here. You know, it's really interesting that this idea of Keynes economics came out of Britain instead of the US. Okay, if you look at the timeline, it came out in the 1930s. Okay, why didn't something come out earlier in the US? Okay, it should have. There's these people, the ruling elite class, not royals, okay, mega corporation leaders, Robberbarons. That group had been running amok in the US prior to the 1930s. That's why it's almost like God put that guy in a separate area because he knew that those people would interfere with that idea coming out. Okay? That's pretty interesting. It's also interesting that Robberbarons, they've risen up again, and I think it's them and coupled with other groups and factions that have taken Keynesian economics out of the teaching in the schools, and them and the socialists and others. Because the idea is if it was being taught, then people would hold them a little bit more accountable. And not all the gifts from the government and grants and stuff would have strings attached. Okay? It's not a grant if it's a loan. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now. Please also like, subscribe, and share.